Modern snow experts said they were safe. Lakota tracker heard mountain planning to kill. The mountain stood quiet under a thick layer of snow, stretching wide and calm as if nothing in the world could disturb it. From a distance, it looked peaceful, almost welcoming. White slopes rolled gently into the sky, and the air above it appeared clear and still. To the trained eye, it was a perfect day. At least, that was what the numbers said. The group arrived early in the morning, their vehicles stopping at the base of the mountain. They moved with confidence, unloading equipment, checking instruments, and reviewing printed charts. These were not ordinary travelers. They were modern snow experts, people trained to read satellite images, weather models, and snow stability reports. Every step they took was backed by data. Their leader reviewed the final assessment once more. Snow density was stable. Wind patterns were mild. No recent signs of dangerous movement. Everything pointed to safety. He nodded, satisfied. According to science, the mountain had nothing to hide. Among the group stood a man who did not speak much. He was not dressed like the others, though his clothes were just as practical. He carried no advanced tools, no digital devices, no charts. His eyes, however, moved constantly. He watched the ground, the distant ridges, the sky, and the shadows between rocks. He was a Lakota tracker, brought along more as a guide than an equal voice. His role was simple on paper: help with routes, help with terrain. No one asked him about safety. No one asked him what he felt. As the group prepared to move, the tracker stepped a few paces away from the noise. He bent down and brushed his hand lightly over the snow. It felt wrong to him. Not dangerous yet, but uneasy. The surface was too quiet, too tight, like something holding its breath. He stood slowly and looked around. There were no birds, no small signs of movement. Even the wind seemed unsure, starting and stopping without reason. Sound traveled strangely, as if the mountain was swallowing it. This was not something he could explain with numbers. It was something he had learned long before, from elders who taught him to listen instead of measure. The land always spoke, they said, but not in words. The tracker felt a deep sense of caution settle in his chest. The experts began their ascent, talking casually, joking, confident in their preparation. Boots pressed firmly into the snow, leaving clean, sharp tracks. Poles struck the ground in steady rhythm. Everything felt controlled. The tracker followed behind, silent. As they climbed higher, the sun rose further, casting long shadows across the slopes. The mountain still looked calm. Too calm. The tracker noticed how the snow reflected light unevenly, how certain areas seemed stiff while others appeared soft without reason. These were small signs, easy to ignore. The man around itself had studying a narrow ridge ahead. The snow there had settled in layers that did not belong together. Old snow held tightly under newer weight. It reminded him of stories where patience turned into danger. He walked closer to the leader and spoke carefully. "The mountain feels closed today," he said. The leader paused, surprised by the comment. "Closed?" he repeated, half smiling. "Yes," the tracker replied, "like it doesn't want footsteps." One of the other experts chuckled lightly. "The models don't show anything unusual," he said. "Everything is well within safe limits." The tracker nodded. He did not argue. He knew his words did not fit their language. They continued upward. As time passed, the tracker felt the unease grow stronger. The air felt heavy despite the cold. The snow underfoot made a faint sound. Soft, but sharp enough for him to notice. A tiny, settling sound, like a warning whispered too quietly for most ears. He stopped again, kneeling to examine the snow. The layers told a story of pressure building slowly, patiently. He imagined the weight above them, silent and waiting. He stood and spoke again, more firmly this time. "We should slow down. The snow is listening." That earned him a few confused looks. "Listening?" someone asked. The leader remained polite but firm. "We appreciate your perspective," he said, "but we've checked this route carefully." The tracker looked at the mountain, then back at the group. He felt a pull inside him. A choice. He could turn back alone, or he could stay and watch. Leaving felt wrong. Staying felt heavy. He chose to stay. They climbed into a higher section where the slope widened. The snow there was smooth and untouched, shining under the light. To the experts it looked perfect. To the tracker it looked tense. He noticed how his own breathing sounded louder than before, how the mountain seemed to press inward, not outward. Even his body reacted, muscles tight without effort. He remembered his grandfather's words. When the land grows quiet, it is not resting, it is deciding. A sudden gust of wind passed through the slope, brief but sharp. Snow shifted slightly, just enough for the tracker to see a thin crack appear and then disappear. He felt it then, clear and unmistakable. The mountain was not calm. It was waiting. The group paused for a short break. The tracker stood apart, staring up at the ridge above them. He imagined the weight held there, balanced on thin trust. He could feel the danger, not as fear, but as certainty. This place was not safe. Not today. He turned back toward the others, knowing his warning might once again fall into silence. But some warnings are not meant to be accepted. They are meant to be spoken. The mountain did not need to shout. It had already said enough, and the tracker heard every word. The group moved higher into the mountain as the day slowly unfolded. From the outside, everything still looked normal. The sky remained clear, and the snow reflected light in a way that made the slope look smooth and harmless. To the experts, this was confirmation. The mountain, according to their knowledge, was behaving exactly as expected. To the tracker, it was doing the opposite. He walked slightly behind the others, his eyes never resting in one place for long. He watched the way the snow bent under each step, how some areas felt firm while others felt hollow beneath the surface. The mountain was uneven in its silence, and that made him uneasy. He wanted to speak again, but he struggled to find words that would make sense to people trained in charts and graphs. His understanding came from stories, experience, and careful attention. It was not something easily translated into modern terms. Still he tried. "The wind is changing too often," he said quietly as they paused to adjust their gear. "It can't decide where to go." One of the experts checked a handheld device and shook his head. "Wind speed is low," he replied. "Nothing unusual." The tracker nodded slowly. He had expected that answer. He stepped aside and looked down the slope they had already crossed. Their tracks cut through the snow like lines drawn without permission. Something about that bothered him deeply. As they continued, the terrain narrowed, forcing the group closer together. The slope above them rose steeply, covered in thick layers of snow that looked untouched for a long time. The tracker felt a tightening in his chest. This was a place where pressure gathered, a place where weight stayed longer than it should. He stopped again. "This part holds too much," he said. "It doesn't let go slowly." The leader sighed, not out of anger, but impatience. "We've tested similar conditions many times," he said. "We're well within safety margins." The tracker met his eyes. "Margins don't matter when the land decides otherwise." That earned silence. Not agreement, just an uncomfortable pause. Then the group moved on. The tracker fell quiet after that. He realized his warnings were being filtered, softened, and set aside. They heard his words, but not the meaning behind them. As the hours passed, small signs began to appear. The snow made faint cracking sounds beneath their weight. Not loud enough to alarm the experts, but clear enough for the tracker to hear. The slope shifted subtly, like a deep breath being taken and held. He noticed how even the air felt different. Cold, yes, but also heavy, as if the mountain was pressing down instead of opening up. He remembered being taught that the land was alive, not in the way people usually imagine, but in a way that demanded respect. It remembered seasons, footsteps, and pressure. And when it reached its limit, it responded without warning. The group stopped for another break. Laughter echoed briefly before being swallowed by the snow-covered walls around them. The sound faded too quickly. The tracker found that unsettling. He knelt again and pressed his palm into the snow. It was firm on top, but weak underneath, a false sense of strength. He imagined layers stacked upon layers, waiting for the smallest excuse to move. He stood and faced the group. "We should turn back," he said clearly. This time the reaction was different. One expert frowned. Another crossed his arms. The leader looked thoughtful but conflicted. "Turn back?" someone asked.
"We've come this far. The mountain doesn't want us here today," the tracker replied. "It's not anger.
It's warning." A few exchanged looks. One shook his head. With respect, he said, "We can't base decisions on feelings." The tracker did not raise his voice. "These are not feelings. They are signs." The leader took a moment, scanning the surroundings. Everything still looked calm. Too calm. But calm was what he trusted. Calm was measurable. "We proceed carefully," the leader decided. "But we continue." The tracker felt a deep disappointment settle in him. Not toward them, but toward the situation itself. He had done what he could. Still, he stayed. Walking away now felt like abandoning responsibility. As they moved forward, the slope grew steeper. Each step required more effort. The tracker noticed that the snow here responded differently, compressing too easily, then resisting, as if unsure whether to hold or break. A sudden sharp sound echoed across the slope. Everyone froze. "What was that?" someone asked. "Snow settling," another replied quickly. "Normal." The tracker knew better. That sound was not release. It was adjustment, a warning movement. His heart pounded, but his face remained calm. Panic helped no one. They moved again, slower now. The tension was no longer just his. It had spread, thin but noticeable. Even those who trusted the data felt something was off, though they did not say it. Clouds began to form unexpectedly, thin at first, then thicker. The sunlight dimmed slightly, changing how the snow reflected around them. Shadows grew sharper, more uneven. The tracker looked up. "The weather is turning faster than expected," he said. "That wasn't forecast," someone replied. The tracker did not answer. He was watching the mountain's upper ridges. The snow there looked heavy, weighed down by time and cold. Another sound followed. Louder this time. Everyone stopped again. The leader raised a hand. Silence fell. A thin line appeared across a slope above them, barely visible. It did not break. It only formed, slow, patient, deliberate. The tracker felt a cold certainty wash over him. "This place is done holding," he said quietly. No one laughed this time. The mountain was no longer pretending. And for the first time, the experts began to listen, not to their instruments, but to the ground beneath their feet. The warning had been given. What they chose to do next would decide everything. The thin line in the snow remained visible for several long seconds. No one spoke. Even breathing sounded too loud in the sudden stillness. The mountain felt different now, no longer quiet in a peaceful way, but alert, like something awake and watching. The tracker kept his eyes fixed on the slope above them. He had seen this before, not exactly like this, but close enough to recognize the meaning. The mountain had begun to change its mind. The leader slowly lowered his hand. "Everyone stay still," he said, his voice controlled but tight. They stood frozen, each person aware of their own weight pressing into the snow. The tracker felt the ground beneath his boots respond, almost like a soft answer. The snow was no longer just holding. It was adjusting. A low sound rolled through the slope, deep and short, like a heavy breath. Some of the experts looked around, confused. Others stared upward, fear finally breaking through their calm expressions. "That's not normal," someone whispered. The tracker spoke without hesitation. "The mountain is shifting its balance." The leader glanced at his device, then back at the slope. The numbers no longer felt comforting. They felt distant, slow, unable to keep up with what was happening right now. Another sound followed, sharper this time. Snow loosened above them and slid a short distance before stopping. It was not a full release, but it was enough. "Move," the tracker said. "Not fast, not straight up." He stepped to the side, guiding them toward a section of terrain that angled away from the main slope. His movements were calm, deliberate. Panic would only make things worse. Some hesitated.
"We need a plan," one expert said. "This is the plan," the tracker replied. "Follow me." The leader watched the snow above them carefully.
He saw small shifts now, tiny movements that the models had not predicted. He made a decision.
"Do what he says,"
he ordered. They began moving sideways, one careful step at a time. The tracker chose each step with care, avoiding places where the snow felt hollow or tight. He searched for ground that allowed release instead of resistance. The air grew colder. The sky darkened slightly as clouds thickened overhead. The change came too quickly, without the slow build they had expected. Another crack appeared higher up the slope. This one spread wider. The tracker felt his chest tighten. "We don't have much time," he said. A sudden rumble echoed across the mountain, louder than before. Snow above them broke free in a narrow section, sliding downward with growing speed.
"Keep moving," the tracker said firmly.
The group did not need convincing anymore. Fear sharpened their focus. They followed his lead, stepping where he stepped, trusting his judgment without question now. The sliding snow passed just behind them, stopping short of where they had been moments earlier. It settled in a heavy pile, quiet but threatening. No one spoke. The sound alone had said enough. They reached a small area where the terrain dipped slightly and the slope above was broken by rock. The tracker motioned for them to stop. "This spot can breathe," he said. "It lets the snow move instead of trapping it." The leader nodded, his face pale. "How did you know?" The tracker did not answer right away. He listened instead. The mountain was still active, but the danger had shifted. It was releasing tension in pieces now, not all at once.
"We wait,"
the tracker finally said. They crouched low, keeping weight spread out. Minutes passed slowly. The mountain made more sounds, small releases, distant slides, pressure easing itself in stages. One expert wiped his face with a shaking hand. "The forecast didn't show any of this." The tracker looked at him calmly. "Forecasts don't hear what the land remembers." As the slope continued to settle, the group remained silent. Each person was trapped in their own thoughts. Confidence had drained away, replaced by respect and fear. The leader stared at the mountain, replaying the tracker's earlier warnings in his mind. He realized now that the warnings had been clear. He simply hadn't known how to listen. After a long while, the mountain grew quieter again. Not peaceful, but less tense. The tracker stood slowly. "We need to leave," he said. "Now while it's letting us." No one argued. They began their descent, moving carefully but steadily. The tracker stayed in front this time, no longer questioned. He chose paths that avoided heavy buildup, guiding them through areas where the snow had already released. Behind them, parts of the slope continued to shift, not violent, but constant. A reminder that the mountain was still in control. As they descended, the leader walked beside the tracker. "You tried to warn us," he said quietly. The tracker nodded. "The mountain warned us first." They reached lower ground as daylight began to fade. The temperature dropped, and the wind returned, steady now instead of confused. The mountain had finished speaking for the day. When they finally stopped to rest, everyone looked exhausted, both physically and mentally. Survival had replaced pride. One expert broke the silence. "Why didn't you leave when we didn't listen?" The tracker looked at the slope above them, now hidden by distance and shadow, because knowing danger and walking away are two different responsibilities. The group sat quietly, understanding the weight of his words. Above them, the mountain stood unchanged in shape, but not in meaning. It was no longer just a place on a map. It was a presence they would never forget. And they all knew one thing now, with absolute clarity. The mountain had not been wrong. They had been the ones who needed to learn how to listen. Night arrived faster than expected. The light faded behind thick clouds, and the mountain's shape slowly disappeared into shadow. The group moved as carefully as they could, but darkness changed everything. Shapes looked unfamiliar. Distances felt wrong. Every sound seemed louder, closer, more serious. The tracker slowed the group and raised his hand. "We stop here," he said. The leader looked around. "Is it safe?" "As safe as the mountain will allow tonight," the tracker replied. They were in a narrow section where the slope eased slightly and large rocks broke the snow into uneven patches. It was not comfortable, but it was stable. The tracker knew this kind of place. It did not hold tension for long. When snow moved here, it moved in small pieces, not all at once. They set up temporary shelter using what they carried. Hands moved quickly, quietly. No one joked now. No one argued. Each person understood that survival depended on cooperation and calm. The tracker moved around the area, checking the ground, listening. He pressed his ear close to the snow in some places, not because he expected sound, but because he trusted stillness. The mountain was restless but tired. It had already released much of its pressure. Still, it was not done. A low rumble rolled across the distance, not close enough to harm them, but close enough to remind them of where they were. One expert flinched. "That's far," the tracker said calmly. "Not for us." They settled in, conserving energy. The cold crept in slowly, sinking through layers of clothing. Breath turned thick and visible. Time felt stretched, heavy. The leader sat quietly, staring into the dark. He replayed every decision in his mind, every warning he had heard and set aside. He felt the weight of responsibility press on him harder than the cold. After a long silence, he spoke. "I should have listened sooner." The tracker sat across from him, his face calm. "You listened when it mattered." The leader shook his head. "We trust what we can measure." "It makes us feel in control." The tracker nodded. Control is not the same as understanding. That sentence stayed with everyone. Hours passed slowly. The mountain shifted now and then, sending distant sounds through the dark. The tracker noticed when the air changed slightly, when the snow relaxed. These were signs of release, not threat. At one point, a sharp sound echoed closer than before. Snow slid somewhere above them, unseen but real. The group froze. The tracker listened, then relaxed his shoulders. It chose another path. No one questioned him. As the night deepened, exhaustion settled in. Muscles ached. Thoughts slowed. Fear softened into quiet alertness. The mountain was still powerful, but it no longer felt angry. It felt finished speaking. Just before dawn, the wind shifted again, this time steady and smooth. Clouds began to thin, letting faint light return to the sky. The tracker stood and stretched slowly. "We leave now," he said, "before the sun wakes it again." They packed quickly, moving with purpose. The cold had sharpened their focus. Every step felt important. As they descended, the damage became clearer. Large sections of snow had released during the night, leaving open scars across the slopes. Paths they had considered safe the day before were now gone. One expert stopped and stared. If we had stayed, the sentence did not need finishing. The tracker guided them around the damaged areas, choosing routes that stayed low and flexible. The mountain was calmer now, but still not forgiving. As the sun rose higher, the group finally reached safer ground. The slope softened, the tension loosened. For the first time since the warning line appeared, people breathed freely. They stopped near the base, looking back at the mountain. In daylight, it looked beautiful again. Quiet, innocent. No one believed that appearance anymore. One expert broke the silence. "We call ourselves experts," he said softly. "But we missed everything that mattered." The tracker did not correct him. He simply listened. The leader turned to the tracker. "You saved us." The tracker shook his head. The mountain allowed us to leave. They stood there for a long moment, each person changed in ways that would take time to understand. Later, reports would be written. Data would be updated. Charts would be corrected. The event would be described in careful language, but no report would fully explain what happened. Only those who stood on that slope would know the truth. They had been warned. And they had survived, because someone knew how to listen when the mountain spoke. The journey down the mountain continued quietly. No one rushed. No one talked much. Every step felt heavier, not because of the snow, but because of what they now understood. The mountain had allowed them to leave, but it had also left its mark on each of them. By the time they reached the lower valley, the air felt different, warmer, lighter, safer. Trees appeared again, standing tall and still, as if welcoming them back. The sound of the wind softened, no longer sharp or unpredictable. They stopped near their vehicles. Gear was dropped slowly onto the ground. Hands trembled slightly, not from cold anymore, but from release. Some sat down without speaking. Others stared back toward the mountain, now distant but impossible to forget. The leader took a long breath. "We're alive," he said quietly, as if saying it too loudly might break the truth of it. No one answered, but everyone felt the weight of those words. Later that day, after rest and warmth returned to their bodies, they began discussing what would happen next. Reports had to be written. Explanations prepared. Questions would be asked by people who were not there and never would be. The leader knew what those reports would look like. Careful language. Technical terms. Adjusted predictions. The event would be described as unexpected, rare, difficult to forecast. It would not mention how close they had come. It would not mention the warnings that did not fit into data fields. It would not mention the moment when the mountain spoke clearly, and only one person understood its language. The tracker packed his belongings quietly. He did not wait for thanks. He never had. For him, the experience was not about recognition. It was about responsibility, carried and completed. As he prepared to leave, the leader approached him. "I don't know how to write this," the leader admitted. "There's no place in our system for what you did." The tracker looked at him calmly. "Not everything needs to be written," he said. "Some things need to be remembered." The leader nodded slowly. "I'll remember." Others gathered nearby, listening. One of the experts stepped forward. "Can I ask you something?" he said. The tracker waited.
How did you know the mountain was going to turn on us?
The tracker did not answer right away. He looked toward the peaks, now glowing softly in the distance. "It wasn't turning on you," he said finally. "It was correcting itself. We were standing in the way." That answer stayed with them. The group eventually parted ways. Vehicles drove off in different directions. Life waited beyond the valley, unchanged on the surface. But inside them, something had shifted. Weeks later, the reports were submitted. Adjustments were made. New recommendations were added. The event was discussed in meetings and classrooms. Still, something was missing. Some of the experts began to notice things they had ignored before. The way silence felt different in certain places. The way animals moved, or didn't. The way snow sometimes held its breath. They did not talk about it openly. Not yet. But they listened more closely than they had before. The leader especially changed how he worked. He still trusted science. He still respected data. But now, he left room for something else. Something older. Something that did not ask permission to exist. He invited voices he once overlooked. He asked different questions. He paused more often. And sometimes, when standing in the quiet before a decision, he remembered the tracker's words. Control is not the same as understanding. As for the tracker, he returned home and told the story the way it had always been told in his community. Not as a tale of danger, and not as a victory, but as a lesson. He spoke of a mountain that carried too much for too long. He spoke of people who trusted numbers but forgot to listen. He spoke of a moment when respect arrived just in time. The elders listened and nodded. They had heard similar stories before. The land always taught the same lessons. Only the listeners changed. Seasons passed. Snow fell again. The mountain settled into itself, quiet and patient. It did not remember the reports. It did not care about titles or expertise. It remembered weight. It remembered pressure. It remembered who listened. Far away, someone would one day stand at the base of that same mountain, reading updated charts and forecasts. The data would look good. The conditions would appear safe. And somewhere among them there might be a person who paused, looked around, and felt something that could not be measured. If they listened, they would live. If they did not, the mountain would still speak. It always did, and it always would.